So I used the expression, I said, a life to imitate for our January speaker, because he had just such a really impressive career and leading a big team at TikTok. I would use the expression a hard life to even try to imitate to describe our February speaker, Karl Kilb. Karl and his co-founder, Eddie. Where's Eddie? There's Eddie. Eddie's in the back. They were at the Catholic Crypto Conference, apparently. And one of the folks on our team, Taylor McGee, was there, and that's how we found Karl. So it was really pretty providential. But we're really excited because Karl's had this amazing career. And I want to give him his due by actually reading the full bio, because it's just, it's not quite as linear as you'd imagine. So Karl is an entrepreneurial leader and a corporate lawyer with more than 30 years of experience in building and monetizing intellectual property, including data aggregation and analytics, secure identity verification and transaction systems, blockchain and Web3, not sure what that is, but Web3 solutions, multimedia content, and other technology. Karl is the founder and CEO of multi-channel cybersecurity, pioneering cybersecurity solutions that use multi-factor and channels to avoid a single point of failure for identity verifications and activity validation. Karl's also the co-founder with Eddie and chairman of Crescite Innovation Corporation, building Web3 and other solutions for the Catholic community, including the world's first faith-based token. Are we going to be able to buy that right now?
Yes.
We can buy that. All right.
Okay.
It's for sale. And Crescite launched Faith Games, Inc., which we'll hear about tonight, a company devoted to faith-based virtual reality, gaming, and other multimedia content. Karl spent most of his career at Bloomberg, including more than 15 years as the company's first general counsel. During 22 years at Bloomberg, Karl built and managed a global legal compliance department and supported all aspects of Bloomberg's worldwide business, including data, news, software, telecom, and electronic trading. Karl regularly lectures on legal and business development matters and entrepreneurial issues, including at the Fordham University School of Law, where he's the chairman and co-founder of the Entrepreneurial Law Advisory Council, and at NYU, where he served as the Lawyers Alumni Mentoring Program called LAMP since its inception in 1987. Prior to becoming a lawyer, though, Karl was actually a broadcast journalist for CNBC, Financial News, 1010 Wins, and Bloomberg, among many others, pioneering business news formats and broadcast coverage of the financial markets. Karl's a native New Yorker and a resident of New York City with his wife, Alexis Christoforous, who's a broadcast journalist for ABC News. Karl has 3 kids. His oldest boy, Karl IV, goes to NYU. Let's see, Karl was a member of Fordham's Intellectual Property Law Journal and the IPLJ office, which is named for him. Karl's had a lifetime dedication to Catholic causes and is a leader with Boy Scouts of America, among about 12 other things. So, Karl, we're so excited. We're very grateful to have you here. Please welcome Mr. Karl Kilb.
I really appreciate that introduction, and you even got my wife's maiden name right. That's really a tough one. So first of all, thanks to all of you for being here. Special thanks to Father Isaiah for hosting us, to Joe for having me here today. And things are really meant to be in life. Really amazing. Looking back, I was a freshman at NYU. It's hard to believe, in 1982. So coming back here today, and every time I come down to NYU, it's just like yesterday. You get off the subway at Astor Place, you run over here. The only difference is today I was actually really early. I used to be running really breathless into all my classes back in the day. But so exciting to be here. And then I was afraid if the room got too warm or too filled, I figured we could always move out to Washington Square Park, because believe me, the park is a lot nicer and cleaner now than it was back in the 80s when I was a student here. So always great to come to events like this and to have a chance to meet so many wonderful people and to be back here at NYU. And as Joe mentioned, I have had a lot to do with the school all these years. Graduated in 86. We ended up starting a mentoring program for pre-law students in the 90s. I taught a class here for about a dozen years. So just always spectacular to be here at NYU. And of course, my wife's also an NYU grad, and our oldest son is a junior here right now. So I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about tonight. And I thought about how blessed I've been to deal with so many wonderful people all through my life. And today, even to deal with so many great young people who are involved with so many aspects of my life, technology companies, universities where I teach or mentor, and other aspects of my life. And as Joe mentioned, my wife and I have 3 children, oldest guy here at NYU, a son at Babson College outside of Boston, and a daughter who's still in 7th grade at St. Ignatius Loyola Grammar School. And she's actually the one that really runs the household. So what I thought I would try to focus on tonight is, what so many young people like yourselves tell me all the time. Everybody's trying to figure out what they're going to do. What am I going to do with my life? What's my career going to be? If I'm fortunate enough to figure out what my career is going to be, how am I going to have any kind of work-life balance in my life? How can I structure that? Where is faith going to fit in to my life? So I want to try to talk about these topics as they have been woven through my own life. And I'm a very informal person, so feel free to interrupt me, jump in with a question, anything you want to do. So as Joe mentioned, I'm kind of a lifetime entrepreneur, certainly a lifetime practicing Catholic, born and raised in the Bronx. So I'm a native New Yorker. Went to NYU undergrad and Fordham Law School, so I didn't even leave to go away to school. So real New York City guy through and through. I always have tried to be as supportive as I can to Catholic schools and churches and causes. So I'd like to spend some time on what I call the pillars of entrepreneurship and kind of factors in career building that I think everybody should think about really at any age, not just young people like yourselves, but young at heart people even like me. So these pillars of entrepreneurship, and I'm especially happy to mention these 4 pillars because the same 4 pillars were referenced by a bishop who gave a homily at Seek. So I'll talk about that in a bit, but I was so happy to be in the audience and hear this bishop actually talk about entrepreneurship and do it focusing on these 4 pillars. Vision, you have to have some idea what you're looking to do. Focus, whatever you're looking to do in life, and even if you're doing a million things at once, you have to kind of focus on each one at a time to make it work. Teamwork, none of us do anything in life alone. All of us do things better when we know how to collaborate with others, and we can find people who are great at working with us and us with them. And the last one, which I think is just so crucial to everything that we do, and more is just missing, unfortunately, in too many aspects of the business world, is integrity. What could possibly be more important than integrity? So many things in life we can learn, but integrity is something we absolutely have to carry with us in every single thing that we do. So I learned a lot of important lessons as a kid in the Bronx, as what I like to call a teenage entrepreneur. I was one of those kids in the Bronx who would do anything, right? You need your snow shoveled, because back in the 70s we actually got snow. So you needed people to shovel snow. That was actually something that people really valued. Working in their yards, their front yards, whatever conceivable job to try to make a few bucks. I was one of those young kids that was happy to do. At some point as a youngster, and I was interested in journalism, I started to think, what makes people buy a newspaper? Now, probably a lot of you today don't even buy a newspaper, and you couldn't even conceive of buying a newspaper. But back in the 70s, people still bought newspapers. What might make more people buy more papers? And I thought the local newspapers would sell more papers if they did a better job covering high school sports. So I mentioned to the editors, and what did I do? As a teenager, I just used information to get the phone number for a few newspapers, cold called them, just out of the blue, and said, hey, why don't you do more to cover high school sports? Well, we don't really have people that can cover those beats. Hello, here I am. So I got myself a job basically covering high school sports, and the paper suddenly realized, wow, a lot of people buy newspapers when their kids' names are in the papers. So it was a good story for the newspapers. And then during some summers, when we would disappear from the Bronx to a house in Pennsylvania, I pitched the local newspapers up there on covering local softball, swimming, bowling leagues, anything that I could cover that they would want to put in the paper. So I learned some really important lessons through these early examples. important in your career to have a vision that makes sense. You may see the vision, but how do you articulate it to others? And those early examples, it was me telling newspaper people, hey, you want to sell more papers? You want to have more ads? You need content people actually care about? I can help you with that. And then this was as, like a 13, 14-year-old. And I'm seeing this is kind of how to move ahead and market yourself. And as I focused on reporting accurately and effectively and trying to do it in an entertaining way as well, I started to realize that journalism might be the right place for me. And New York is kind of the media capital of the world. So I thought, where would I go to school? So I started to look around, and NYU just seemed like the natural fit for me. So here's where I ended up. And as I was here at NYU, you talk about sometimes divine providence, things just being meant to be. I was in the newsroom at WNYU, and the phone rang. And it was a radio station here in New York looking for a writer-producer. And I just happened to be at the college radio station that day. I picked up the phone. I understood what they were looking for. I convinced them in 45 seconds on the phone, which is also a very important skill set to have, that I could do this job. And I took the job. And back then, it was a news talk station, AM 570 WMCA, which these days is a Christian radio station. That's another story. But back then, it was a news talk station. So really interesting that I was able to get the job there. There was a guy there that came to like me so much, he always referred to me as the kid. And one day he said, "Kid, I need a day off to play golf. And I think you could do my shift on the air." He said, "I asked for the day off, I didn't get it. But I'm going to think that I had Memorial Day off. You're going to be the only one here as the writer-producer, and you're going to get to make your New York City debut. So be ready to roll on that day." All right, so 5 o'clock in the morning on that Monday, Memorial Day, Bert doesn't show up. I called the program director. I said, "Bert's not here." They call his house. His wife says he's out playing golf. All this was just a little bit well orchestrated by Bert. And the next thing I know, I'm going to get to be on the air for the first time at WMCA. Fortunately, it went well. I'm not sure how many people were up that early to listen, but I did call my grandmother to make sure that she tuned in. And she was always my biggest fan. I lived with my grandmother while I was at NYU, which was really fortunate for me that I had a place to be in commuting distance of the school. My parents at that point had moved the family up to Rockland County. And, getting that first newscast under your belt, like anything you do in life, all of a sudden you're like, I've got this. I can do this. And it was at that point in my life probably one of the most amazing phone calls when the boss called back and said, "Hey, I heard the first newscast. It was great. You can do the rest of the shift." And then about 2 minutes later, Bert called. And he said, I'm driving to the golf course, kid. I just heard you. You got it. And I was that's all I needed to hear. And sometimes in life, you just need somebody that kind of validates what you're doing, gives you that confidence level, and you're good to go. So I worked at a number of different broadcast jobs all through college, and then right after college, I worked at 1010 Wins Radio for a while. Had a lot of fun there. You can imagine if you're familiar with 1010 Wins Radio, the world has changed so much now that you can even hear it on FM. So I'm sure they'd be happy for me to point out that I think it's 92.3 on the FM dial. You could also catch your favorite all-news radio station. So I had a blast working there as well. But at some point I had this epiphany. I was out covering some crime stories. And I thought about, is this what I want to do the rest of my life, or do I want to build some companies? Do I want to create some things? Journalism is a very reactive business. Something happens, you go cover it, and you report on it. And it's an awesome job. But at some point I was like, I think I want to actually build some things. So how am I going to pull that off? And I thought I should go to law school. But law school is not cheap. And how are you going to pay for that? And how are you going to potentially balance work and classes? So I decided that I needed a broadcast job that had consistent hours. Because how could you have crazy hours working at an all-news radio station and still go to law school during classes that are at preset times? So necessity is the mother of invention. What type of news might be consistent Monday to Friday so that I'd be able to go to law school at night? And then I just found out that they were starting this thing called business news, financial news. There was something called the Financial News Network. So I thought, let me go audition for the Financial News Network and try to instantly become expert in the financial markets. And at least I had taken some business classes here at NYU. So at least I had some good idea, and I certainly knew where the New York Stock Exchange was. So I had a NASDAQ opening up in Midtown at Times Square. So got the job at FNN and went to law school at night at Fordham. So you can imagine what kind of commitment that was, right? Working full-time during the day. I didn't want to say goodbye to 1010 Wins. I still really enjoyed working there, so I did that on the weekends. And then I went to law school at night at Fordham. And one of the funniest things was, because hopefully you'll try to intersperse some senses of humor in the talk, but I was at Fordham as a first-year law student, and a professor in my enormous torts class got to the roll call. He got to me, and he said my name, and he said, "Oh, Mr. Kilb, I think I hear your dad every day on 1010 Wins with the same name as you." And I said, "Actually, Professor Byrne, that's me." And he said, with the bifocals on and deep voice in front of the huge lecture hall, he said, "Well, Mr. Kilb, if you're on 1010 Wins every morning, what are you doing in my class this evening?" And I said, "With all due respect, Professor, the best I can to stay awake." So you can imagine he called on me every night. And I should have expected it after that joke. But then one day, he said to me, "Mr. Kilb, I just can't rattle you." And I smiled. He was giving it his best Socratic effort to try to rattle me. And I said, "Professor, the only difference between your class and my day job is that you're the host and I'm the guest. Usually I get to ask the questions, but it's just not that crazy." And I said, "And frankly, if I give you a bad answer, it might be embarrassing in front of 300 people. But if I screw up in the morning, we got about 3 million listeners. It's going to be a lot bigger story." So it wasn't all that. But he came to respect the idea that I was in class at night. And FNN, around that time, went bankrupt. And I'm thinking, how am I going to continue to work now that my company went bankrupt? And I was thinking maybe it was a good idea that I kept the foot in 1010 Wins. But FNN got acquired by CNBC. And fortunately, CNBC kept me, so I was one of the originals at CNBC. But all of a sudden, I had to do this crazy thing. If you're a kid from New York City, regularly venturing over the Hudson River every day to go to work is not fun. And CNBC was in Fort Lee, New Jersey, which might as well have been, in another hemisphere. So I started to have to figure out how to get from Manhattan to Fort Lee, back to Fordham Law School, and that's what I did for 3.5 years. And it was a pretty crazy time, but I think if you're still in college, or if you ever had that kind of experience where you spend that much time with people, some of my friends from Fordham are some of the best friends I still have, including one woman that was in class with me that I ended up as the godfather of one of her daughters. So really just spectacular lifetime friendships from that time. But then you talk about kind of divine intervention and what's meant to be. And one of the things hopefully you'll hear throughout tonight is just when you think you have a plan, something might come along that you go, gee, maybe that's really what I should be doing. And I just ask you to always try to have a plan in life, but be open to any inner voice that tells you there's something else you should actually be doing. Because that voice is coming to you for a reason. So for me, I was starting to look at law firms. I was interviewing at law firms, and I was figuring I'll probably be a traditional lawyer at a law firm, but to keep a foot in broadcasting, maybe I'll work for Court TV, which was super popular back then. Most of you are probably too young to remember, but it was a big deal during the O.J. Simpson case, for example. So I thought maybe that's the way this is all going to go. And then one day, I'm at CNBC, and somebody comes into the newsroom and says, hey, we got this new thing in the newsroom if anybody wants to learn how to use it. And another lesson in life is never stop learning, right? Especially in the tech space. If you have an opportunity to look at something and get immersed in it, go for it. You never know how that thing might be helpful. Well, that thing in the corner turned out to be a Bloomberg Terminal. And, now all the things you take for granted with the internet were not prevalent back then. We didn't have anything to look up anything on, right? You use the yellow pages to find a phone number, right? And as a reporter, you really had an old school Rolodex, printed contact information for people. The cell phone that I had was the size of a cinder block, and I used to plug it into the lighter in my car in order to give it juice to do stuff on the air. So this Bloomberg Terminal really caught my attention. And a lot of people in the newsroom were like, how different could it be from all the other tools that were out there? Bridge Telerate, Quotron, so many other tools that were out there at the time. But as I started to play with this thing, I'm like, wow, this thing's unbelievable. I mean, it's got literally all kinds of data, analytics, everything you can conceive of at my fingertips. And I was lucky to run into a couple of people today, like Alex. A few people told me what they were doing for a living, and I just kind of mentioned, I said, hey, by any chance, do you happen to have a Bloomberg? And they were like, oh yeah, like I don't even know what I would do without that thing. I was like, exactly. So that's exactly right. So I looked at this Bloomberg Terminal, and I thought, you know what, maybe that's where I should go work. But how are you going to make that happen? You're almost done with law school. You're a career broadcaster, and there's this Bloomberg Terminal. And then all of a sudden I heard that Mike Bloomberg, who wasn't a household name in 1990-91 like he is today, bought a radio station. He bought AM 1130 WNEW. Back in the day, WNEW was your Frank Sinatra station. Tony Bennett, big band. They also had Giants football and Notre Dame football. So when I heard that he bought WNEW, I knew right away he's not buying this thing because he's a Sinatra Tony Bennett fan. He may like those guys, but he's probably going to put financial news on this radio station. Who better to talk to him than the guy that helped launch the Financial News Network and CNBC? So it's time to cold call Mike Bloomberg. If you ever have to cold call somebody cold call is basically calling somebody out of the blue that you've never spoken to before. What do you think most people want to hear about in life? Themselves. Exactly. So I figured I need a 45-second pitch that's going to make this guy think that he needs to invite me in for a meeting. So basically in 45 seconds, I explained to him that I was at CNBC. I used this Bloomberg Terminal every day. I loved it, but I had a lot of suggestions on how he could improve it. And I heard he just bought a traditional radio station and was going to integrate it into his terminal. And as a guy that had worked at FNN and CNBC, I could help him do that. So I basically got all that out in about 45 seconds. And Mike, fortunately, said, come in tomorrow, 499 Park Avenue, 1 o'clock. All right, I'll see you then. So I went into Bloomberg and I met with Mike Bloomberg. And the interview was probably supposed to take, well, I wouldn't even know if I'd call it an interview, because basically I hit him up for a meeting and I got a meeting with him. I felt like it was a job interview. So I went in there and, 10 minutes became 20, became a half an hour. And it was a phenomenal conversation in a glass enclosed conference room next to a bunch of fish tanks, if you've ever been to Bloomberg. And that's what the office looked like at 499 Park Avenue back in the day. And then Mike said something really interesting to me at the end of the conversation. He said, in life, regardless of what we do, we all need to be able to sell. I understand that you're just about out of law school. I understand you've been a career broadcaster, but can you sell? Because we all have to sell something in life, even if it's ourselves. Why should I be convinced you can sell? And I kind of lean back in my chair and I smile and I say, come on, Mike. 24 hours ago, I'm not sure you had any idea who I was. I got your number out of information. I cold called you. I convinced you in 45 seconds to take the meeting. You've been blowing off people for the last half hour. We went from 10 minutes to probably 40, 45. Are we good here or what? So the answer was, we're good here. And he, it was really funny. He said, yeah, I'd like to bring you on. And I knew he was a good guy right off the bat because he wasn't concerned about job description. His mindset was, we'll figure it out as we go, but I know I want you to come work for me. And he was also concerned about my current employer. He didn't want me to leave them hanging. He said, give them as much notice as they need. Join me as soon as you can, and we'll figure out what your job description is. So when I joined Bloomberg, we were trying to figure out how to build the world's largest private network. Again, years before the internet was prevalent. This is early 90s. And when I got there, I certainly didn't advertise to Mike that my passport was blank. I was really a New York City kid who had only been on one plane in my life at that point, and that was to go on one family vacation to Florida. Never had left the country. And soon after I joined the company, I was actually a very unique job description. I was the first broadcaster there. I signed the station on January 4th of 93. So we just celebrated our 30th anniversary of the launch of the radio station, WBBR. Soon after becoming a lawyer, I became the company's first general counsel, built out the global legal and compliance department. And in the early days of Bloomberg, one day I mentioned to Mike that we needed some data from the Asia Pacific region. And before I could finish the sentence, he said, "So when's your trip?" So the first time I ever left the country was to go to Japan, Hong Kong, and Australia for about a month and work out ways to get a bunch of stock exchange data and wire service data and all kinds of other stuff onto the Bloomberg Terminal. So I had a spectacular run at Bloomberg. I was the company's chief counsel for 15 years. I spent 22 years at Bloomberg altogether. And I think about the age I was when I started at Bloomberg and the age I was when I left. It's pretty wild. And another amazing thing that happened to me at Bloomberg, I met my wife at Bloomberg. That's another whole story. Fortunately, really funny, the company was growing so quickly. I had a desk in the broadcast area and a desk next to Mike for when I got off the air. Long story short, we were hiring so quickly that somebody had to share my desk in the broadcast area. And little did I know or she know that we'd end up being married a couple of years after that. So again, you never know where your spouse might pop up. So more recently, I'm the founder and CEO of a cybersecurity company. We're focusing on all kinds of identity verification, authentication. Also co-founder and chairman of Crescente Innovation Corporation, along with Eddie Cullen, who's here. We're using new technologies and methodologies to better the world. At the end of the day, what is technology supposed to do? It's supposed to solve problems. And talk about divine intervention. Back in last August, we didn't know that there was such a thing as a Catholic crypto conference. We got a phone call in August asking if we'd like to be involved in the world's first Catholic crypto conference. So I had to do a little double take and go, okay, I get the alliteration, but are these words really supposed to be in the same sentence? Catholic crypto conference. And yes, they are. So we went to the Catholic crypto conference, and we were really blessed to sponsor the conference and to introduce the first keynote speaker, which was a priest from the UK, Father Andrew Pinsent. And Father was just absolutely spectacular. And he gave a talk about the history of the Catholic Church and its relevance to technology. And without boring you too much or going on too many tangents, all through the centuries, you could point to places where the Catholic Church was front and center in technology. So why shouldn't it be today? That's what we were thinking. Why not? And so often in life, people complain about things, but then don't offer a substitute. There's a lot of content out there that's not suitable for any audience, never mind young people. But young people are going to play video games. Young people like virtual reality. There are things young people are just going to do. So why not give them content that they could actually learn from, benefit from, that's positive from an educational and evangelizing point of view. So that's one of the things we're doing with another entity we created called Faith Games. And we're doing a lot of work under the brand name Meta Catholic, which how cool is that, right? A Catholic metaverse. So we think this is, pretty amazing. So we view ourselves as being at the intersection of technology and faith, and we think that certainly the Catholic world should be pushing itself forward in the technology space. I think we saw a lot of what's happened in the crypto space over the last couple of months, and certainly when you look at the types of things that have happened in the crypto space, maybe some good old-fashioned Catholic morals could find a good place to be in the world of blockchain, Web3, and crypto. And that's, of course, something that we've done with the launch of the first faith-based token, our Crescente token that came out on Christmas Day. So just kind of to summarize, because I'd love to take a lot of questions from people, My wife and I, our 3 kids, all products of Catholic schools, as is Eddie Cullen. Eddie's the most Jesuit educated guy I know. He went to St. Ignatius Loyola Grammar School, Xavier High School, Fordham College. So through and through, Catholic Jesuit educated. We place a lot of value on education, faith, and giving back in any way that we possibly can, trying to pay things forward. The NYU mentoring program that I've been involved with since inception, LAMP, Lawyers Alumni Mentoring Program, is a really good example of that. And I'm really proud to say we started that program in 1997, a little late because of COVID. We're going to celebrate the 25th anniversary this year. But so many students that I mentored in the early days of that program, the only thing I ever asked for them in return was to become a mentor someday if it suited them. And the number of original mentees that are now mentors, I'm especially proud of. So I think, at every stage of your life, it's important to try to look back and assess where you are and where you want to be going. It's never too late to change direction, never too late to make adjustments, and never too late to reinvent yourself. And certainly I find myself doing that all the time, and especially over the past year, where we've launched a few new entities, and you can't help but really reflect on your life when your son with the same name is a student at the school you went to 35, 40 years ago. It really does make you think. So I like to think I've always worked hard in my life, and I've always tried to do the best I can at any job I've been at. But I also want to stress the importance of work-life balance and finding time for your family and friends. Because at the end of the day, if you don't find time for your family and friends, what was it all about, right? So one of the things, at least in my household, I learned as a kid, try to have dinner together. If there's nothing else you can do, try to at least do that. And it's really fun at the dinner table when you get to ask your kids, hey, so what happened today? And they actually tell you. That's really a good story. Because they know if they don't tell us, we're just going to ask again anyway. So we tend to try to find that out. I was very fortunate in my life. I'm a very sports-oriented guy. I was a head travel baseball coach for years. That was another thing that I didn't expect to do. Long story short, a kid I went to school with in the Bronx, his older sister ran the Yorkville Youth Athletic Association. Long story short, I had no idea it was her because she had a new name. She was married. My kids were playing ball. For whatever reason, the coaches weren't working out. The parents asked me what I thought the problem was. You could probably tell I'm not bashful. I told them what I thought we should do with the team. They mentioned it to the woman that ran the whole league, and she goes, I know this guy. He went to grammar school with my little brother. She approached me. She asked me to coach. I said I would do it. Turned out to be one of the best experiences of my life, coaching travel baseball for a bunch of young guys for about 10 years. I was also an adult leader in the Boy Scouts. Each of my sons are Eagle Scouts. And I wouldn't trade the camping trips and all the crazy hiking and kayaking and canoeing that we did all those years for anything else. New technology actually allows you to do a lot of things you never could have done before. Did I take phone calls in the dugout? Sure. Did I have a phone in my pocket that sometimes when I was coaching third base, I had to be texting somebody, but still kind of keeping an eye on the hitter and who's on base? Sure. But that's how you do it. You have to somehow try to find a way to balance it all. So just a couple of things I want to kind of leave you with to remember. Always bet on yourself. Always. Never doubt you can do something. If you have to learn or get some help or whatever it takes to put yourself over the top, do it. But always bet on yourself. Never feel that you're not going to be capable of doing something. Always let your faith and your conscience be your guide. Just when you think you know exactly what you should be doing, something's going to tell you, maybe you should go in this other direction. Don't ignore that. At least really think about it, because this voice is coming to you for a reason. Never be afraid to speak up and ask questions. I'm just watching the Netflix documentary on Bernie Madoff. Why did Bernie Madoff get away with all this stuff for all those years? I guess everybody was afraid to speak up and ask some questions. Simple, right? Even most recently what's happened in the crypto space. More people should just speak up and ask some questions. Always be looking to improve yourself and always be looking to help others out. And I cannot even tell you how many times in my life I was fortunate to help somebody out or they helped me out. Years, sometimes decades went by. All of a sudden you run into them again and it's like you remember those days and you're so grateful you helped each other out then, and then you're kind of reconnecting because it's meant to be for some reason. So I know I hit a lot of different things. Hopefully I didn't bore anybody. It doesn't look like anybody fell asleep. So I'd be happy to take any questions from anybody, and thanks for listening. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Anybody, any questions? Sure.
Hi, I'm Juan Telles. I'm going to be working for PwC in their metaverse practice starting in July. How much did you show or hide your Catholic faith, especially at the beginning of your career? I believe there's this perception among many young Catholics that if people know I'm Catholic, that I'm, anti-abortion, anti-gay marriage, etc., I'm going to be immediately fired, if not at least secluded from my coworkers, my team's promotions, bonuses, etc. So how much do you hide it, show it, etc., to go up the ranks, regardless of your ability, because that's not the problem, let's say?
Sure. No, I really appreciate that question. And to me, my Catholic faith and the morals and values that come with it, I've like to think I've shown throughout my life. I've never looked at anything as coming in silos or buckets, like this is your job and this is your family and this is your faith. They're all intertwined. And at the end of the day, you think about the real basics of the Ten Commandments, and they're kind of like your broadcast news version of how you're supposed to conduct yourself. I think they were given as bullet points for a reason. It's great to read Bible passages, but for a lot of people they may be long and difficult to get through. It was almost really the broadcast news version of how you're supposed to conduct yourself. And when you think about it, even in the business world, if people conduct themselves with integrity and keep those values close, good things will happen. And in life, look, all of us make mistakes. We have problems. Things don't turn out the way we thought they would. But if you have integrity, because you have always conducted yourself appropriately, when something goes wrong, people will justifiably give you the benefit of the doubt because you deserve it. And when you mess up, you should own up to it. And if you need to ask for forgiveness, you should do it. And then if you're in the position of maybe being the boss and somebody messed up and they are genuinely apologetic and they appreciate how the mistake occurred and they are going to make every effort to do the right thing going forward, you have to give that person a break. And that's the way good things happen. So to me, I've always looked at everything as being intertwined. And I was very fortunate that all the years that I was at Bloomberg, I was part of, or many of the years that I was at Bloomberg, I was also part of the Inner City Scholarship Fund. Because I was I'm still a big believer in people having the ability to choose where they go to school. And if you cannot afford a Catholic education, it was great that there was an organization that was willing to do that. And Bloomberg was always extremely, gracious in supporting that. In fact, the chairman of Bloomberg is still the chairman of the Inner City Scholarship Fund. So,
sorry, follow-up question.
Sure.
Bloomberg goes to the Ultimate Dinner, and so he's been for a long time, working with Catholics in many different. But do you think it's different in other organizations, corporate organizations?
I can't speak to other organizations. I can only speak to what I'm familiar with. But certainly, I'm really, blessed in my career that when I was a broadcaster, I would be available to do almost any story, anytime, day or night, but they knew my phone was not going to be on when I was in Mass. And they could almost bank on it, that if Karl's not picking up the phone to go cover a story, because I appreciated time and a half on Sundays if I had a chance to get overtime that week, if I'm not answering the phone, chances are I'm at Mass. And chances are in an hour, he'll pick up the phone. So that it was that kind of a mindset. And then I was very blessed to be at a company for 22 years at Bloomberg that really valued each individual person for what each person brought to the table, and really was not so concerned about anything else. Just looking at each person and saying, I'm going to treat each person well, no matter what. So I can appreciate that a lot of things may not happen at every company, and that's too bad. But I think if people feel that they aren't being treated well, they should speak up. Definitely. Sure. Anybody else? Sure.
Can you give an example of some current Catholic media that you would like to create one of your new ventures? Is there any good TV shows or movies that you aspire to make?
Yeah, well, so the main thing we're doing is we're creating virtual reality experiences. So one that's already out there, for example, is imagine a virtual reality Stations of the Cross, where you actually feel as if you are there each step of the way. And as amazed as I was when I sat there and watched it for the first time, I thought about all the other things we could create. And maybe it's because I've spent so much of my life in broadcasting and media, but I do believe there's a tremendous power in experiencing something. And you could read the passion, but when you feel like you're sitting in the middle of it, it's really amazing. And at least for me personally, since I like to always be involved in whatever I'm doing, because it was an experience that I was truly a participant in, I think it was even more moving, because it was as if I'm sitting there in the middle of this experience and there's nothing I can do to change it. It's going to happen regardless. And sitting there with that Oculus headset on at Seek in January in St. Louis and watching that, I was really, really amazed. And then I wanted to see the reaction of everybody else. In most particular, I was wondering about the reaction of all the religious people that were there. And Eddie and I, certainly one of the most special things to be standing there and watching a group of sisters with the Oculus headsets on, just amazed at this. And then a few of them left, and I thought, oh gee, I hope they were okay with the experience. And it was to go get other sisters and say, you have to see this. And it was just so amazing. So I think, the priest who is really our spiritual advisor through and through on this, Father Ian, says it really well. He said everything we're working on is meant to be. God knew at some point there would be this technology. So why aren't we using it for good? And I just kept thinking, kids are going to play games. They like the tech. Why not have the messaging be positive? And I don't necessarily want to talk about all the video games that might not be positive, but without going into too many specifics, most of them involve blowing things up and stealing cars. So maybe we should be learning about the saints and how they contributed to the faith that we have. So that's what we're trying to do. We'll also create children's content, because I do think children learn a lot through video. So I could imagine kindergartners watching some of the stuff we'll create. And I have my own personal focus group, because I have 3 kids and all their friends. Plus I felt like I had 10,000 new friends at Seek when I was there in January. So I think there's really an appetite for this content, and we're excited to be doing it. Sure.
When you talked about, I guess, after you left college and relying on yourself, how did you know that certain things were a right career move for you?
A lot of times, to be honest, it was just a gut reaction. And it's really funny in life how if you just really listen to your heart, you could make a good decision. And it was really funny. I'm also very fortunate that, in particular, my dad was a really good listener. And he almost would let me talk through what I was going to do and why, without ever seeming skeptical. And, when I told him I was going to go to NYU and be a broadcaster, okay, that's what he wants to do. Then I got out of here and I worked at a bunch of radio stations and TV stations. And then the natural thing would be, okay, my kid's on his career trajectory. He likes what he's doing. He's on the air. All is well. Yeah, I think I'm going to go to law school. But I don't want to take out loans to do it. I don't want to give up my broadcasting job. And I think more and more in life these days, we hear about the gig economy and people having their hand in a lot of different jobs. I kind of conceived of that as a kid. I was one of those, I thought, hey, what's better than, shoveling snow for 5 people, getting 10 people, right? What's better than working for one radio station? Maybe I work for a few. What better way to put pressure on one of them to actually give you a full-time job than to know you're still working at the other ones? So, and even in an era where a lot of people use other names on the air, I never did. I always used my own name. And a lot of people had agents. I never did. I figured, who's better going to represent me than me? Plus, they get a percentage. So it just never seemed like it made any sense. So I always kind of, in some ways, bucked the trend. When it was time to go to law school, most people would go full-time and not work. I kind of went full-time and worked. I remember it was really funny that the dean one time at Fordham said to me, you're not supposed to work 10 hours while going to law school full-time. And I smiled and I said, I can honestly tell you, Dean, I'm not working 10 hours. Right? Little did they know how many I was actually working. So I would take 1 credit less than full-time and make it up during the summer to be able to work all through. And each time, something just told you that was the right thing to do. Like when I first saw Bloomberg Terminal. And during COVID, you start to realize that, maybe there are many other ways that the Catholic Church could be leveraging technology. I mean, think about it. We had to, the only way to participate in Mass was to do it remotely. And what was amazing was I was thinking to myself as a broadcaster, how could the church use multimedia technology? And frankly, zooming into the Cardinals' Mass meant I could actually participate in Mass. And in rural communities, or certainly in New York City, I did a lot of food deliveries during COVID with my sons. It's amazing how many people live on the 4th and 5th floors of walk-ups and are in their 80s. What if they can't get to Mass? At least they could watch. Maybe a Eucharistic minister can get to them. So there are always ways that technology could be involved. And then you just kind of got to listen to your gut. And then the other thing I'll say about that is don't spend too much time in life second-guessing and kicking yourself. Because sometimes you listen to your gut, or you think you're listening to your gut, and it doesn't work out. But I don't second-guess or kick myself for that. At least I try not to. Instead, what I say to myself is, I made the best decision I could with the information I had at the time. And sure, in hindsight, there are a lot of things we might do differently, right? But we didn't have hindsight at the time. We just had to go with what we got. But to me, going against your gut is kind of like swimming upstream. It's just think about what you really want to do and go for it. Sure.
I have a question. I'm a current sophomore at NYU. I'm studying BENT, if you know the minor. This is entertainment, also computer science. So I'm curious about what are some of the most important skills that right now as a college student should cultivate ourselves?
So I'm always a big fan, no matter what you want to do in life, of understanding how to present. It's probably the most important skill. I kind of go back to that Mike question. Can you sell? I think it's an underrated skill. Being able to explain something in 45 seconds. Because a lot of people don't have a great attention span. So these tools didn't exist back when I was in school. PowerPoint and the ways to make fancy presentations. We didn't have those things back in the day. But understanding how to put together a presentation and how to articulate it. And one of the many things I love about NYU is you could take classes in different divisions. So one of the things that I've really impressed upon with my son, and I'm so proud of him for doing it, is he's at the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music. But he takes classes at Steinhardt. He takes classes in philosophy. Takes classes in business. So I would say, I'm sure NYU has the concept of, I don't know what they call it today, it was the core curriculum back in my day, classes you had to take. But there's a reason for it. It's good to be well-versed in all of these disciplines. I took a class here, at the time it was called World Religions. And it was fascinating to learn about other religions and where they have similarities with Catholicism. So there were so many great classes that you could take. I would take as well-rounded a curriculum as possible. I would immerse yourself in tech, cybersecurity, data protection and privacy. These are huge things going forward. But what I also always tell people is, what are you really passionate about? What's your natural skill set? And how could you kind of intertwine those things to build a career out of it? Because it's really funny. My son's a really gifted musician. I can't play a single instrument. I have zero talent in those spaces. But he had talent. We saw when he was already 4 or 5 years old. So luckily he's done all that stuff going up here. But it's funny, talking about presentations. To tell you a really quick story from grammar school. I was just thinking about the other day, talking to a kid I went to grammar school with. Back in the day in grammar school in the Bronx, they had talent day. And kids had all kinds of talents. Irish dancing, singing, could play all these instruments. Every kid in the class had some kind of a talent. Except I felt like me. What am I going to do? So at the end of it, Sister Terrence said, does everybody have a job for talent day? If not, raise your hand. And I was the only one to raise my hand. I said, hey, sister, I didn't get a job. And she laughed and she said, oh, I forgot to tell you, Karl, you're hosting Talent Day. You're going to introduce all the acts and explain what they are going to do and keep the show moving. Can you do that? And I remember thinking, yeah, sister, boy, can I do that? And I had a job. And that was the first time I, other than reading at my first communion, that I ever got in front of an audience and did something like that. And then I went backstage when it was over, and sister came over to me, and she had a big smile on her face, and she said, that was fun, wasn't it? You liked that. And I said, I really did. And she said, well, then that's what you should do. And it was a very simple message. I never forgot. And that's what I would tell everybody. We all have talents. You're familiar with the parable of the talents. Some people, use their talents. Some may not use them to the extent they should. But everybody has things that we can do well. And that's what we should try to focus on. And then find people to complement us that do way better than we do at other stuff. Sure.
I also have another question. I'd be curious about, is there an equation for happiness?
I don't know. I think for most people, happiness comes from surrounding yourself with people that you really want to be with, and from doing things that you find value in. I think that is probably generally what makes most people happy. So I think if you're fortunate enough to find things you actually like to do, think about it, you're going to spend a lot of time working. So find something you actually like, so that you really do enjoy going in there every day. And then surround yourself with people that you really want to be with. And if you could somehow find things you like to do and surround yourself with people you like to be with, it's hard not to be happy. Especially when it's 60 degrees in February. It's a pretty good day, right? And then think, no matter how bad your day is, and we all have bad days, something good must have happened. Come on, right? Look back on the day, find the one thing that worked out well, and just go, that was pretty awesome. And the other stuff, I'll figure it out tomorrow. But you just, this, don't get down on yourself. Don't kick yourself. Just keep moving. Anybody else? Sure.
You mentioned that you stayed in the same company for 22 years, and it seems and go to different companies, what's your, I guess, like, what kind of made you stay for 22 years?
I'm so glad you asked me that. And again, this is another like fundamental gut check type question. Should I stay or should I go now? At least that was a popular song from the Clash when I was back at NYU, right? We actually broke that song on WNYU, I think, back in the day. I was like, this is actually a good song, right? But anyway, should I stay or should I go now? That's the most basic career decision that a lot of people have. I never doubted that I wanted to stay there because I knew we were building something special, and I was really proud to be a part of it. And we were really small when we started. Our company picnic was at Mike's house in Westchester. That's how small we were when we started. By the time I left, the company picnic took over Randall's Island. You know, it went from a couple hundred people to close to 20,000 employees. I was attorney number one, and by the time I left, you know, we had a huge global legal department, you know, that I was really proud to start and used to spend a lot of time, you know, traveling the world on all kinds of stuff. But there was a fundamental decision around 2000, I'd say. You know, if people are probably familiar with the dot-com bubble, right? It was like everything .com is suddenly miraculously going to be amazing, right? And I had all these people coming up to me, making me job offers. And a lot of them were talking about stock options, which Bloomberg's privately held and doesn't have stock. So we would share in the equity through a formula, but, or at least share in the revenue. But that, you know, it's another story. But all these people are trying to hit me up. Hey, Karl, you should leave for XYZ.com company because they'll give you stock options and blah, 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 blah. And I would look at the fundamentals of the company. And I would say to myself, I just don't see these guys lasting. And then when the people were talking to me about the stock options, I said, you got to realize that the options only have value if the company has some success. Otherwise, these options are without value. You know, the grass isn't necessarily always greener. And you can imagine how that played out, right? Through it all, through 9/11, through the big power outage in 2003, through all the crises we had in 2008. Somehow we just kept growing the company. And so many other companies went by the wayside and even had to merge to try to keep up with us and still couldn't. I think in your heart, you'll know if the opportunity makes sense. And for me, you know, one of those fundamental moments was imagine you're working, you actually convinced CNBC, which was owned by General Electric, and Westinghouse owned 1010 Winds at the time. They were diehard competitors. And I convinced them each to let me work for them and use my own name. And then I went into each of them and I said, hey guys, I'm sorry, I got to give my notice. Where are you going? They assumed I was going to the other one or yet some other broadcaster. I said, I'm actually going to go work for Bloomberg. And I'll never forget somebody looking at me and go, the guy with the box? And I said, yeah, the guy with the box. I think, you know, that box, the terminal, is really going to take off. And I'd really like to be a part of that. And the guy said to me, well, you know, if that doesn't work out, you know, you can come back here and, you know, work on the air again, I guess. You know, and that was it. And I saw that guy at a financial media dinner like 3 or 4 years later. And I just kind of smiled and went over to him and he, you know, shook his hand and I said, hey, Box did all right. And it was just, you know, kind of funny. But, you know, but you don't know. But to be honest, if it hadn't worked out, I wouldn't have kicked myself. Because the thought of needing to go there was so overwhelming that I only would have kicked myself if I hadn't done it. And I think a lot of times in life, when you look back on your life, it's not what you did because you did it because you thought you should do it. It's some of the things you didn't do. And what's funny, I remember when I was in my 20s, I mean, if I do have any regrets, I wish I had traveled more as a younger person, especially to see, excuse me, some relatives that ended up passing away, or I only got to see them much later in life. But I always used to think, eventually I'll get to travel. And little did I know I'd end up at a company that had offices in 153 countries. And I ended up going to a heck of a lot of those. And, you know, being really fortunate to travel. So everything does happen for a reason. Sometimes you have to figure out what that reason is. And and try to go with your gut. And also don't assume everybody knows better than you do. When everybody's telling you what to do, listen to them, but you make the last decision. Because who knows better what you want than you, right? And then at least you know it was your call, no matter how it works out.
Awesome. Thank you, Karl.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.